All right, welcome back to Way of the Wrench, and on today's very special episode, I'm going to be showing you how to properly diagnose and repair warped rotors or warped discs. So go grab a root beer and enjoy the show. All right, so first, really good logical question is what actually causes our brake components to become warped in the first place? And there are three main causes. So here they are. All right, number one cause is from the incorrect installation and removal of wheels. So for example, at a shop, if they're using an impact gun, they tighten them up too hard and they don't know what they've actually set them to. That's going to warp a disc right away. Or if they don't use a cross pattern and they just go in a circular pattern, what can happen is they'll have like half the wheel tightened, probably too much as well, and the other side hasn't even been tightened yet, and that can cause a warp to our brake components. Now, this warpage is permanent and it happens right away, and the only thing you can do is either replace the disc or machine it like I'm going to show you here in a bit. So I always recommend that when you're tightening wheels that you do it by hand and make sure you use a torque wrench to the specific torque specs and do a star pattern first to make sure it goes down flush, and then do a circular pattern just to double check that your tightness is done, and in 100K or 1 week, recheck that to make sure nothing's loosened up. All right, so the second cause of brake components being warped is the fact that you have gotten your brake components too hot. Either you've been driving around town with your other foot dragging just gently on the brake pedal, or maybe you just finished a day of skiing and you're going down the mountain and trying to maintain the speed limit, so your foot is on the brake constantly. Now, in both of those situations, you're going to get your brake components really, really hot, and then at the very end of the hill, you're probably going to be sitting at a traffic light. Now, when you're sitting at that traffic light with the car not moving, you got two things happening. The first thing is you're going to be depositing friction material onto those hot parts only in that one spot. So when you start moving the car again, you're going to feel kind of like a pulsing sensation because there's a thicker spot than anywhere else on that disc. Now, the other thing that happens is that when those metal parts are starting to cool down, where you've got your brake pads touching, as opposed to where they're not touching, are going to cool and shrink at different rates, and that can cause some warping as well. And then the third thing that could cause your brake components to be warped is the fact that you are generating too much heat, once again, but because you have a faulty brake component. So this could be anything from a seized piston inside your caliper that is allowing you to put the brakes on, but not fully releasing. You could have a really jammed up sliding floating mechanism where it's not floating and one side's getting a lot of heat and friction and the other side is not. You could have a failed internally flex line that is allowing pressure to go to the caliper but not allowing it to return. And you could also have a brake disc that is just too thin and there's just not enough metal there to be able to dissipate the heat, and so you're having warpage from that. Now, if you need to know how to be able to inspect all your brake components, I'll post a video for you so you can go check that out and know exactly what to do. All right, so time for some really good diagnostic skills so we're not just throwing some money at this problem and replacing parts that don't actually fix it. So some symptoms that you might actually experience when you have warped brake components is that when you put your foot down on the brake pedal might shake or pulse a little bit. Now, just like any kind of worn automotive component, it depends on how bad it is. So we've got awesome good part here and a really horrible failed part here. So as it starts to fail, the pulsing will just start a little bit, but if it's a really bad component, that pulsing and shaking in the brake pedal will be really, really bad. Now, keep in mind this is also a speed dependent thing. So if you're going fast and you're having the shaking, it's going to be very, very fast, very high frequency, or how many times per second it shakes. And as you slow down, it will kind of slow down. Now, when you come to a stop, the other thing you might notice too is that when your foot's lightly on the pedal and you're coming up to a stop, you may actually feel that the car seems to almost like have a heartbeat the way it's braking, where it kind of brakes and then doesn't brake, brakes and then doesn't brake. And we're talking really faint. And like I said, it kind of feels like a weak pulse heartbeat in your brake pedal. And that's another sign that you've got a warped rotor. Now, you may or may not hear some sounds, and once again, it depends on how bad the warp is. If you have a really bad warp, you may hear some sounds as well. Now, the other thing is we don't know if this is front or back. So a really good strategy is if it's a front problem, when you have the pulsing brake pedal, you may also have a little bit of shaking in the steering wheel, but once again, it's only when you're on the brakes, and that's because your sliding calipers are having to compensate for that warped rotor, and that gets transmitted up into the steering wheel. Now, the other thing you can do to confirm if it's front or back is if you use your parking brake, either through the lever or your foot pedal, when you come to brakes with that, it's only using the rear brakes. So if the vibrations and sounds and whatever is gone, then you know it's in the front. If it's still there, then it actually is the rear. But it generally is the front, because usually about 90% of the braking is done with the front brakes, hence why they get so hot and warped up. Now, as a final diagnostic measure, before I replace the part without knowing for sure if it's bad, I can actually check it with a dial indicator, which has a magnetic base. So the magnetic base actually has kind of like an angled end on it here. And so we find somewhere up here, usually on the McPherson strut, where you can put that, and you can set the magnet on it and make sure that it's actually got a very good, strong kind of connection to that, because if it is barely hanging in there, if this falls to the ground, that's usually the end of these dial indicators, and there goes 100, 150 bucks. Now, these knobs here, you can undo and swivel this. And what you're wanting to do is this little plunger part that comes in and out, you want this to be 90 degrees to the surface that you're measuring. So you can adjust these to make it however you need it to, like that. Make sure everything's snugged up. Now, when you set this up, make sure that the plunger has been pushed in a little bit and that you are starting in the range of what this thing can actually measure. So the way you can tell is there's another little circle down here that has numbers 1 all the way through to 0. That is the 0 to 1 inch that this gauge is able to catch. So right now you can see that we're on 1, 2, 3, 4, so we're almost in the middle of the range, so this should be okay. Now we can adjust this outside dial so that the needle is right on our 0, and I would recommend pulling the plunger out, letting it fall back to make sure it goes back to the same spot. Now all you got to do is you spin your rotor like this and take a look at the variations in your rotor, and if it's really badly warped, you're going to see that this plunger is going to go up and down and all over the place. Now this one's actually pretty good on this vehicle. Pretty much bang on. It does kind of vibrate back and forth, but you'll notice that the plunger comes right back to 0 wherever we stop it. So in this case, this vehicle is not warped. Now, you would look on the service specs on all data for this. It actually says the maximum allowed run out is 0.05 millimeters or 0.02 of an inch. And on this gauge, each one of these little lines is worth 1/1000 of an inch, or 0.001 inches. So this gauge would have to go more than 2 notches in different spots on this disc as you spun it for it to be no good. So in this case, this disc is actually not warped. Okay, and I'm set up on the other side here, and you're going to see a totally different story on this side. So you can see this thing is out 0.22 of an inch, and that's definitely warped. So this is going to have to be replaced, or it needs to be remachined. Now 0.22 of an inch is quite a bit of warpage, so there must have been some crazy heat going on, and I wonder what it could have been. Look at these brake pads. One's still got some meat on it, but the inside one with a piston is right down to metal, and this has caused a ton of damage on the one side of the rotor, and the other side looks brand new still. So that must mean that there must have been some huge differences in heat, and that's what caused the warpage. Let's take a look at the rotor. All right, this side looks nice and smooth and no gouges. This looks okay. Let's look at the inside. Ugh, this side's chewed right up. So if this doesn't clean up on the brake lathe, we're gonna have to replace this with a new rotor. Now, one other thing you can do is you can take a micrometer and you can actually measure the thickness of your rotor at several different spots and see if there's any variations in size. Because if there is thinner and thicker spots, when the caliper's trying to grab, it'll feel like there's brakes and no brakes, just like a warped rotor. Now, generally these variations in thickness are in your online repair manuals, such as all data. However, if it's not listed, I would say that any variations in size over and beyond what the runout is too much, and that needs to be replaced. Now, in order to replace this brake disc or to machine this, we're gonna have to take off the caliper and then the caliper bracket. So let me show you what you gotta do. On the outside of the caliper, you have to take off this spring clip, so get yourself a flat screwdriver, just stick it underneath and pry up, and careful, there is a bit of spring tension on there, so make sure you're wearing safety glasses. Okay, on this 2002 Mazda Tribute, there's these little plugs on the end of these rubber boots. Take those off, and there's another one at the bottom. And then using a 7mm Allen key or an Allen key socket, we're gonna undo the slider pin, and it comes out as a slider pin bolt. like that. Take the bottom one out too. And then you can pull this caliper out. Now it might just wiggle out, but in this case it was actually pretty tight because of the pad being ground into the other side. So if you need to, you can use a screwdriver and kind of just pry up on it a little bit to get some looseness in there, and then this will come out. So slide this off. Take your pads out at this point. And then don't let this hang. Hang it off of a wire, off of your McPherson strut. So you can use a coat hanger, or in the shop here we use a welding rod. And hang it up nice and high so it's out of the way and we're not asking the flex line to hold it up. And then to get the caliper bolt brackets off, I've got an 18mm socket and a flex adapter on an impact. Make sure you're going lefty-loosey. And then this caliper can come right off. Okay, and then the disc can come right off. And if it doesn't come off that easy, you might have to hit a little bit here and here with a wooden mallet just to get it to kind of crack the rust that develops here, and then that'll come off. Ooh, smooth. Yeah, rough. Now while I'm here, I might as well talk about it. You get yourself a wire brush and you're gonna clean this hub really well, because that's what's going to kind of center your new rotor or the machined rotor when you put it back on. Also clean this surface up. And once you have cleaned all this up, I would put a little bit of Never-Seez just on the outside of the hub, just so that you don't ever have it stick again. Don't put any other anti-seize on anything else. Okay, based off the damage on the rotor, and if we try to push this piston back, you will see that it does not want to budge at all, and this should be pushing back pretty easy. So this is a seized caliper piston. We're going to be replacing this caliper. And you can see that crack right there and that flex line. These flex lines are ancient too, so we're going to replace those at the same time. Okay, start by taking these clips off. Okay, ahead of time, take your new caliper, take out the little cap for where your brake line goes. Take your new flex line. In this case, you don't need the copper washers with a banjo fitting. So I'll spin this in. Make sure you do it by hand so you don't cross thread anything. And go ahead and snug this up. Okay, we'll take the flex line off on this side. You should use a flare nut wrench so you don't strip anything and have issues. And this may start leaking right away. Okay, and then go ahead and put your new flex line in, reverse order. Okay, match up your old rotor with your new one to make sure you got the right part. And then go ahead and put your new rotor on. And I don't like to fight this loosey-goosey while I'm trying to put brake caliper stuff together, so I usually just take a couple lug nuts and just spin it up just to hold it in place while I'm doing that. And then put your caliper bracket on. In this case, this is getting torqued to 111 foot-pounds. Okay, take a little bit of silicone grease and we're going to put a thin film on these slider pins so we don't have any issues. And keyword, thin. Don't be gooping this stuff on like crazy. All right, because we mounted the caliper, we're going to just take out these slide pins. It'll be a lot easier. Okay, once again, we're going to take some silicone grease and we're going to pre-lube up these pads. So there's the left set, here's the right set. And where we want to lube is on the back side here and on the edge details where this slides inside of the caliper bracket. Now once again, we're not gooping it on so that it comes off and contaminates our brakes. Just put a thin film to prevent any kind of rattling from going on. So like I said, just thin film, no extra goops. And do not get any on the friction material here. Okay, and then on this one, same thing. Now this one goes inside of the piston, so it's kind of like a circle around the back here. And you can put some on the end of these little tabs that go inside the piston, just so we don't have any of those metal on metal squeaks. Now I always check if these pads will slide properly in the grooves in the caliper bracket, because sometimes these aftermarket parts need just a touch of something removed. So that's sitting in the groove there, and you can see it can go slide back and forth. So that's okay. And then the side that goes on the piston sits right in the same track, and you can see it's going to move back and forth as it needs to for that floating caliper. So those are good. Okay, now the one pad that has these clips that have to go into the piston, you can preload this one. It's a bit of a snug fit. And then go ahead and put your caliper on. Make sure that your flex line here isn't twisted. Like that. And then go ahead and put your caliper slider bolts back in. Give the caliper a little wiggle to help kind of center stuff as you're trying to figure out where that threaded hole is. Remember, do everything by hand until you know it's in okay, so you're not cross-threading anything. And these are torqued up to 26 foot-pounds. And don't forget to put the little plastic caps on. Don't forget to take the wire out that you used for hanging your caliper, otherwise that might make some weird noises. And to just make sure that this disc doesn't have any grease or fingerprint marks and get contaminated, we're going to use a little brake cleaner, and we're not spraying over our silicone greased area, we're going to spray over here and then turn it like this. That way there's absolutely nothing there. And don't forget to do the other side as well. Now, because we put a new caliper in here, it's full of air. So you can see this is pretty loosey-goosey right now. So you're gonna get in the car and you're gonna pump brakes about 10 times, and you should feel that the pedal comes up nice and firm. But it also might feel a little spongy still. And the reason why is there's a ton of trapped air in here that we have to bleed out. Now, this video is getting a bit long, so I will make a separate video just on how to bleed brakes for the future. So just a note for you guys, we do need to bleed the brakes on this, and make sure you have brakes before you start driving the vehicle. Okay, and don't forget to put in the little spring clip. And then once you've given everything a once over to make sure everything is okay and you haven't forgotten something, go ahead and put on your wheel. In this case, we're going to be torquing these wheels in a cross pattern up to 100 foot-pounds. And we're also going to be checking these in 100K or roughly 1 week to make sure they haven't loosened up. So off camera, I'm going to be doing a bunch of stuff. I'm going to go finish the other side, so flex line, caliper, pads, and rotor. And then I'm going to do a bleed procedure and get rid of all that air from the hydraulic system. And I will make a video for that in the future for you, so make sure you stay tuned for that. And then I'm going to make sure I've got brakes before I leave. And then I'm going to go do a road test as well as a bed-in procedure for my new brake components. So if you're not sure what that's about, I will post a link to a video above so you can go check that out. Now, in this videos and vehicles example, we replaced the warped rotors with brand new ones, but there is another option. If you have a brake lathe, you can also machine them. So I'm going to be making that video soon, so stay tuned for that as well. Now, if you have any questions or concerns about the video, put it down in the comment section below and I'll try to get back to you as soon as possible. And if you haven't already, why don't you join us on Instagram? That way you can see what's going on in the shop in between videos. Until next time, take it easy.